Hello, how are you? More importantly, how am I? Fine, thanks. Good, even. Because a few weeks ago, I got to cover a film festival. What does that mean? Well, I got to do all of the professional things like waking up early and commuting, eating a croissant in public, being harassed while eating said croissant by the only other people in Leicester Square before 9 AM. Crazy people. I was covering Sundance London. Now, Sundance is the largest independent film festival in the US, and Sundance London is... let's see if you can guess. No, it's the UK version of Sundance. What's wrong with you? A few years ago, I somehow ended up on a mailing list, which means I get invites to see independent films, and I've never questioned it, because I want to see the films. And then this year, I got sent an application for press accreditation, and in a rare victory over my imposter syndrome, I filled it in and sent it off, and they said, yeah, alright, come along. Which was nice. So I got to tell everyone I was press, and I got given a lanyard that said so, and there were free pastries. Oh, and some films. It was at Picture House Central, which is a gorgeous cinema just off Piccadilly Circus. I happen to be a member there, which means I get to go and sit and drink Pepsi sometimes while all the other members who are filmmakers talk about the films they don't plan on casting me in. But there's a nice view, so should we do the films? I will say, it is weird to critique a film when you're even tangentially part of the film industry, as I am, because I know what it takes to make a film, all the effort and the passion that goes into it, and how hard it is to get even one take in the can. So know that I go into every movie wishing it the very best, and everything I say is in good faith. I'm speaking specifically to you directors, please still cast me. Censor is a psychological horror film about Enid, a woman working in film classification in 1980s London. It's the height of the video nasty craze, and among the grisly and brutal scenes of violence, Enid watches a film that bears a striking resemblance to the events of her sister's childhood disappearance. She then starts a descent into desperation, trying to figure out what the filmmaker knows about the case, or if he might even be the culprit. This film had two things going against it. Number one, I don't really do well with horror films, and number two, I don't really do well with getting up early, and this screening was at 9 AM. But I pushed through both of those things, and I loved it. It has a really strong visual style, with the muted greys of the 80s accented by occasional neon or red lights denoting the seediness of the art at hand. Niamh Algar's performance is really solid, and the film generally avoids jump scares, going instead for a more insidious kind of terror. It's a bit meta in places, and film fans, cineasts, if you will, you don't have to. They'll get a real kick out of some of the touches, and at 84 minutes, it flies by. And if you'll allow me to be a real film boy here for a second, put my degree to use for the first time since 2012, it really plays with the grotesque in a way that is hugely effective and utterly terrifying. The look of certain characters, the facial expressions on the posters in the film, and in the closing moments, there's a brilliant use of editing which was chilling, horrifying, made me scared, didn't like it. Admittedly, I did spend a large portion of the film watching from behind my jumper, but the things that I did see were really good. Next on my agenda was the Sparks Brothers. Directed by Edgar Wright, it's a behind-the-music piece on a band I'd never heard of until this documentary, but a band who every band you ever loved loves. Say that while you're drunk. It's clear that Edgar Wright knows the subject really well, and as a fan of his films, it was nice to see him bring his sensibility to a documentary. It was very funny, and there's an array of delightful animations to keep you properly engaged, so all of that Edgarian, Wrightian flair is there. I might trademark that, just in case he wants it, because clearly it's gold. But I didn't adore it, and I think the thing that stopped me is that while this film covers a lot of ground, it doesn't really go into depth on any of it. It's almost like Edgar knows and loves the band so much that he doesn't really want to cut any of it out, which I thoroughly understand, as anyone who has heard me talk about Janet Jackson 3 bottles in at the pub can attest. But it's 2.5 hours long, and I wish it had used that time to pull the curtain back a bit further. There was a section about a creative and financial spiral in the early 90s that felt like it could have been given more attention, if only to show how the band's longevity is down to determination and their ability to reinvent, and why that's a part of what makes them the band that they are. All in all, a thoroughly good watch, something that I think the fans of the band will adore. Just for me, as music docs go, I wasn't as enamored as I'd hoped to be. And the last film of day one was Together Together, a comedy wherein Ed Helms plans to become a single dad at 40 with the help of a surrogate. It took me a while to sink into this, but on reflection, I think that's kind of the point. Like, it knows what you expect to happen in the plot, and so it plays with that. For instance, we spent so long in Hollywood being told that slightly neurotic older men inevitably attract vibrant younger women, so naturally, you're waiting for that to be addressed. And for me, the way it was addressed was a little bit awkward, but again, maybe that was the intention. I think probably because this is the type of film that I, as a creative, am drawn to, I was thinking about the ways that I would have done things differently. But I think that when a film has you thinking about it for a while after it ends about the ways that you would have liked to see the characters do something slightly differently because you engage with those characters, I think that's a net positive. Overall, I wish it had steered away from a few tropes and given some of the other themes more time to be explored, but I thought it was charming. I really liked it. I gave it a clap. What did I learn on day one? Well, two things. Firstly, I can make it through 3 films without going to the bathroom once, and that's huge for me. And secondly, some critics take notes during screenings. Unfortunately, I am not some critics, as noted by this illegible scrawl. At one point, I just wrote over the same line twice. Can't read a single word. Day 2, another early start. Get into this. Not only did I wake up on time, I woke up early enough to catch some of the Olympics before heading out, and then I got to the cinema early. This was the day I sat in Leicester Square trying to eat a croissant while a man danced at me. First up on day 2 was Writing with Fire, a documentary about Kabbalah Haria, an Indian news organisation started and run by Dalit women. It's a fairly typical documentary in structure and form, but it's a really fascinating exploration of India's caste system, and especially the role and expectation of women born in the lowest rung of that system. It's also a film about speaking truth to power, and got quite alarming at certain points, especially when it looked at the rise of nationalism and its wider effects. I really dug it. Also, a lot of the people involved in the film liked my tweets afterwards, which gave me a mild endorphin rush, so extra points for that. You know when they say critics can be bought? I have very little money and even less integrity. Film 2, Zola, couldn't have been more of a shift if it tried. Based on a 148 tweet long thread about a woman's adventure with a fellow sex worker that twists and turns more than a twisty-turny thing. I read the thread at the time, and then again when they announced they were making it into a film, and it is a doozy. So I was curious about this one on 2 counts. First, how do you take a Twitter thread and make it into a film? That's fascinating. Second, there's a very strong tone of voice within that thread. How do you maintain that when translating it into film? And the answer to both of those questions is Janitza Bravo. This is her second feature film as a director, and she does a spectacular job, really playing into the absurdity of the tale. And at times, she kind of veers into something close to magical realism, which I found really entertaining. Particularly when it comes to striking the right tone, I thought she nailed it. I was sat next to 2 black female journalists who I felt like they got lost in the movie, because as it went on, they started to sort of answer back to it as though they were being told this story over drinks or in the salon. And normally talking during movies is a massive no-no, but this was a really special experience for that. It kind of told me that the film was working exactly how it intended to. I was a big fan. I'd love to see this again. I would put this in my BAFTA Adapted Screenplay shortlist if I were a member of BAFTA, which I am not. Next up was The Nest, which starred Jude Law, Carrie Coon, and an excessive amount of mahogany. This was described as a psychological thriller, and no, it's not. They're marketing it like one. Let me read you the tagline. Life for an entrepreneur and his American family begins to take a twisted turn after moving into an English country manor. I would say the twisted turn has nothing to do with the English country manor, and instead it has everything to do with the lies that we tell ourselves and each other, and the real villain of the piece is communication, or lack thereof. What it is an intense family drama that occasionally flirts with being a thriller because big houses in the countryside are inherently creepy. It's very slow, very considered, and I really enjoyed that. I thought the cinematography was so nice. It felt at times both voyeuristic and intrusive, and the performances all round are really strong. I just think I went in expecting one thing, and instead was met with something entirely different, and as a result I didn't manage to connect with it as much as I'd hoped I would. But I did really like it, and I like it a lot more the more I think about it, because I have a better understanding of what the film is. So the marketers, I think, got it wrong. None for Gretchen Wieners. Then I grabbed a quick bite and came back to see MISHA and the Wolves, which is a documentary about... Here's the thing, this was possibly my favourite of all the films I saw, and part of the reason for that is that I went in and was presented with a movie that was different from what I expected, and I know I just complained about that with The Nest, but this is different and I know what I mean. I read that it was about a woman who survived the Holocaust by fleeing into the forests of Belgium as a child, wherein she was taken in by a pack of wolves, which sounds like an unbelievable story, and truly, I wasn't ready for quite how remarkable the story would turn out to be. And I don't want to say any more, because part of the reason I love the film was the way it told me the story and the fact that I didn't know how it was going to turn out. It was so cleverly put together. There were a lot of little things that like dinged in my ear as we were going through it and really came together to make this such a fascinating, not only story, but an experience as a viewer. Generally speaking, I have no time for people who say, oh, you know, biopics are boring because we know how it ends, because that's not the point of a story. What matters is how it's told. But in this case, knowing so little about the story made me enamored of the film in a way that I don't know I would have been otherwise. Brilliantly constructed, fantastically told, and I think fans of a particular, very en vogue genre are going to be really pleased with this one. Absolute scenes, as for the third day in a row, I met my alarm and had a very leisurely ride into town. The schedule for this day was 3 films that were so tonally different, it was gonna feel like being thrashed about in a cinematic washing machine. There's probably a better metaphor there, I'll work on it. The morning screening was In the Same Breath, which is a documentary about the early stages of the global bastard, and it was too real. It's a meditation on the spread of not just the ick, but also misinformation and how the government in China aided that. And then it takes a turn and it explores how the same thing went down in the US. Directed by Nanfu Wang, who is a Chinese-American filmmaker, she won the documentary award at Sundance in 2019 for her film One Child Nation, which explored China's one-child population policy. Both films have a really personal perspective, and within the same breath, it's clear that while Wang is critical of the government, she's never critical of the people being interviewed, which makes for a far more effective documentary than if she allowed us as the audience to keep them at arm's length and in some way feel superior. It's an exploration of how authoritarianism creeps in and how governments can use disinformation to lull its people into a false sense of security in such a way that can have catastrophic global consequences. And it's structured in such a clever way that allows the audience to sit there and think for 1 second oh, I'm so glad I don't live in that regime. Wait, why are you holding a mirror up to me? Fun Wednesday morning viewing altogether. Fuck Trump. What came next on the agenda was a double bill of films that basically gave me whiplash. First up was Coda. Ruby is the only hearing member of her deaf family. Coda is an acronym meaning child of deaf adults. The film follows her as she struggles to balance her sense of duty to her family with her dream of going to college for music. Coda won the Jury Award at Sundance and the BIFA Award at Sundance London, and it's easy to see why, because this is proper crowd-pleasing stuff. I almost feel like it's more of a movie than a film, if you know what I mean, which sounds like shade, but I promise you it isn't. It's very charming. For me, it's a film of 2 halves. I found the first half of the film to be very well-trodden ground. She's an outcast at school who feels most like herself when she's singing. She likes the cute popular boy who is still cool despite being in the choir. There's a flamboyant music teacher. So far, so Glee, right? And what bothered me a bit was that we were spending so much time with that story that is stuff that we'd seen before that I felt we were neglecting the more interesting story, which was how she and her family navigate a world that is hostile to deaf people through ignorance. The family themselves are really brilliantly drawn and played with such vibrance. They have their struggles, but it's framed with sympathy rather than pity, which is a subtle but key distinction, especially in a film like this. The actors have such great chemistry that every time we weren't with them, I was sort of itching to get back to them. I was a bit grumpy, actually. On reflection, I actually think that's part of the construction of the movie, because Ruby's dreams are so separate from her family, and by their nature, they're quite exclusionary.
Everything about me seems to have changed.
But in the second half, I couldn't help it. I just sank into the film and allowed the charm to wash over me, and I was fully in for the ride. As Ruby is confronted with incredibly difficult choices and starts to open up to not only allow her family to know how she feels, but also understand how they feel, the story is full of heart. There's one absolutely beautiful scene with her dad that I just thought was magic. It did that similar thing to Moonlight, which is this is an experience that I will never know, but also I see myself in it, if you know what I mean. Of all the films I saw at Sundance, I think Coda is the one that most of you will like. It's the one we're all going to agree on. Do you know what I mean? I think it's really sweet. And now, please make sure your seatbelts are fastened, because we're about to do a massive U-turn. Very sweet are the wrong words to describe our final movie. Pleasure is... it's a film about porn. I can't show you any clips because I'm afraid of being demonetized and I need all the help I can get right now. How can I give you an idea of the vibe? There's a massive close-up of an erection within the first 4 minutes. There. How's that? Bella is a young Swedish girl who moves to LA to make it in porn. Aren't we all? As she gets deeper into the industry, she's confronted with both the glitziest glamour and the seediest underbelly of the industry. I can't believe I'm about to make this comparison, but similar to In the Same Breath, it's not a film that judges its subject too harshly. The director, Nina Thyberg, has done years of research, and the only actor in the core cast who is not a professional porn performer is the lead actress. There are some positive reflections on the porn industry, as well as some that are unwaveringly brutal, and I think it's not saying anything particularly new, but it's being really bold with what it is saying. There is one single shot of a vagina in the whole movie, and it is far from sexualized, and it's really interesting to look at this film with the idea of male versus female gaze. Particularly when I sit the film alongside Zola, which is also a film about sex work directed by a woman, I think the focal point of the camera is in a different place in this movie. Where Zola lent into sort of the heightened reality, that kind of sumptuously lit hedonism vibe in places, this is much more about the cold, stark truth. it's a full-on film. It's a lot. There are some really graphic, intense scenes, and it's almost like the film is daring you to look away. There's a line of dialogue in there which is like, I mean, you signed up for this, and it's almost like the director is saying that to us as the audience. It's kind of confrontational, very harsh, very, very harsh. I would say it's absolutely one to watch, but one to watch with caution, particularly if you're of a sensitive disposition. I mean, I thought of myself as someone who was quite liberal, and I was there clutching my pearls. I did really like it. I highly recommend it. And it's a bit like Jaws insofar as, you know, it's gonna take a bit of time to get back in the water. Not that much time, I am single. And that was that. Before going home, I had a Caesar salad and it was massive. I didn't manage to catch all the movies, but this was without a shadow of a doubt the most fulfilling 3 days I've had in such a long time. I love movies so much. I love storytelling, I love acting, I love the art of it all. Thank you for watching. I know it's weird to do a roundup of movies that haven't had their full release yet, but as they do, I hope that you come back and plonk a little review in the comments. I would genuinely love to hear them, and please like and subscribe, all the usual things. If we can boost that subscriber number, maybe they'll invite me to more of these. And when I go to Sundance in Utah, I'll flirt my way into a party, schmooze a director, then when I'm in a film that wins the Sundance Jury Prize, you can feel smug because you made that happen.